Suzanne, welcome to CFO at Home. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Vince. I'm so happy to be here.
So, in reading up on you a bit, I know you describe yourself as a lifelong philanthropist. And I also understand that there are some unfortunate circumstances that you've gone through in your life that left you with a substantial amount of money. Since one of the topics we're going to talk about is the complications of women who have greater income or great personal wealth, particularly in terms of a relationship, I would love to learn a bit more about your background with wealth
Yes,
and also relationships.
that sounds great. Well, when I went to write this book was 2012, and somebody said, "Why did you write a book?" I went all the way through. I didn't listen to English in high school, and I didn't have to take it in college because I studied design and plant material. So I was very good at math, and like I wasn't into reading or writing, and I just happened to shout. I was breaking up with someone. I had just inherited money, which I'll tell you the story about. And I found him. He was very hot, younger than I am, a professional athlete, not one in a field that makes a lot of money, and broker than crap. And I thought I could save the world. When I broke up and he was finally slamming his way out the door at the very end, I said, I am going to write a book called A Woman with Means. And he's like, you don't know anything about money. How could you write a book about that? I was like, "Ugh, I do too. I know more than you." Well, really, honestly, Vince, he was right and I was wrong. I didn't know anything about how to be a wealthy woman. So the story was that my whole life has really been perfectly designed to write this book about love and money. And let me tell you something. When you publish a book on Amazon, do you have a book, Vince?
I do not at this time. That is an aspiration for one day.
Okay, that's great. I'll cheer you on to that. Anyway, when you go to pick the category, you have to pick two categories that your book's going to be in. It's just the way Amazon does it. Well, I'm like, I had people helping me, but I was like, love and money. There's no such category. Nobody on the planet has done a TED talk about it. Nobody's talking about the connections between love and money. Now, I can tell you that I know by facts, if the facts are true, that about 52% of us get married and then get divorced. If you look up the statistics on why how the reason for why people get divorced, it says it's about 40% around money. My bet from all the hundreds and hundreds of couples that I've talked to, it's around 70. They just don't know that sometimes their problems are caused around money. I think we just spoke a little bit about that just before we came on the air. So I grew up in a family that was all about the relationship with love and money. Both my parents were poor. My grandfather owned a freight forwarding business, which is called Global Logistics now. But back then, it was taking goods from here to China and back to here again on a big barge and in planes and trucks and stuff like that. Anyway, my father wanted to take the company public, and my grandfather and my father's brother did not. And there was a huge like rift between my dad just like not loving the family and trying to take this company public and the friction that it caused there. And that was the way that my childhood was. The first chapter of my book is called The Apple Doesn't Fall Far from the Tree. And I think the reason why people love my book so much is because it takes them through this journey that makes them look at their own relationships with their family, the lessons that you learned around love and money in your family. Who was the breadwinner? How did this all go? My dad did quite well. He took that company public and he did great. He was a super rock star, and he then ended up with some very serious Alzheimer's and lost most of it. He had, however, against his will, kind of set up this life insurance policy that, and I'm sure Vince, you know some things about life insurance policies. This was a second to die policy, and I never knew whether it would come through or not. I really didn't. I had no idea until I got those checks. And I don't know how many of your listeners out there have ever won the lottery, or I can guarantee you that 97% of them would like to win the lottery. I hear people say this all the time. Inheriting money like I did with no background about I knew how to financially manage it and I did really well with it, but I did not know how to emotionally handle it. So it's like you win the lottery. Well, we know some facts about lottery winners too. Most of them lose their money within 3 to 5 years, lose all of it, gone, millions of dollars gone. They don't know who their families and friends are anymore. People are out, old Uncle Arnold is asking them for money, banging on your door. Uh, and you don't know who your friends are. I mean, I've heard stories of very successful lottery winners. They can't go out. They just get attacked by everybody. So and often there's suicide in lotteries winners. There just are. Um, and it's very difficult to pull up exact statistics for that, but it's definitely a result because they just get so confused. They don't know how to take care of all this. So I felt the same way. So it took me a while, up until about 5 years ago. I inherited it when I was 47, so it was 18 years ago. I'm 65 right now. And it took me up until, gosh, past 60 to really be able to know how to handle this and handle it in relationships. Um, and
Yeah,
yeah,
I've had interviews with people on the podcast here talking about, I think, what's called sudden wealth syndrome.
yes,
And yeah, and I'm sure that's what you're referring to. That did bring something to mind. In the area I live in, I live in Georgia. There is a Georgia lottery. There was a lottery winner to live not terribly far from where I live. So not, billions, but millions, a
yes,
significant
yes,
amount of money. And the news people are like staked out in front of this person's house, waiting for them to appear. I believe Georgia is one of the states. There are some states where lottery winners have to go public in order to get the money. Georgia's not one of them.
yeah,
So I'm watching and I'm going, this person's a fool if they ever return to that house and get any of that heat. They never did. But yeah, we're fascinated by people who get sudden wealth. There are television
fascinating.
programs about nothing except people blowing like millions of dollars. I mean, that's entertaining to us. And I'm sure it's world shattering. It sounds like even before that happened, and maybe it was family money, but it's not like you were struggling before that
Oh, I mean,
happened.
I grew up in a very frugal environment. Well, I grew up with a father that was very frugal. So he wore holey shirts and didn't care. My mother was a little different and bought things like a Jaguar and just put it in the garage and neglected to mention it to my father. And he just never said anything about it. I've always found that to be fascinating. Like, really? But we weren't, we went on our week-long family vacation in the summer and a week trip to go skiing in the winter. I wasn't raised particularly fancy. I wasn't poor, but I grew up in a community where we spent a lot of time outside playing with sticks and rocks and kickball and frogs and all that kind of stuff. So I know people that grew up much fancier than I did. So yeah, it wasn't a shock 'cause my father traveled all over the world, so, he was always looked like he was jet setting, but he would go to 14 cities in 16 days and then come home. He traveled around the world 13 times a year on average, going from his companies to his companies because he put all these companies together across the world. I'm just wondering if we can, because what I was reading in your bio was that what you really do is help couples, families negotiate wealth and how they're going to bring things together and make something of it. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's kind of the mega concept is the whole CFO at home idea
Be at home.
is rooted in the idea that in every family there is one person who naturally gravitates to the person who keeps the budget, whatever that means in your particular household, kind of controls the money. They're the ones
Who do
who
you think
worry
does that
about
mostly?
in terms of male female.
Yes.
I think the stereotypical thing you think of is men. I don't know if that's factual at least in my experience, simply because women, I think, more gravitate to they have kind of a nurturing side. So when it comes to worrying about, hey, how are we going to send these kids to college, that type of thing, they have a tendency to be more concerned about that. A lot of times when men are concerned with money, and again, I'm talking stereotypical high level assumptions, it's probably a little bit more of a game to us. So the objectives are different. I think either gender can play that role,
Yeah,
but I think depending on which gender you're talking about, the game is played differently.
I guess.
That's probably the best way of putting it. So quickly, to use my own example,
Yeah.
I am definitely the CFO of my home. That's just the way I'm shaped. But my mother was the CFO of our home growing up. My father had a great deal of self awareness, and he basically turned, I mean, he worked, but he very gladly turned over the money to my mother simply because he knew he was not very good at handling money. We would ask him,
That
"Hey
is
dad,
great.
hey dad, can I have $1? Can I have $5? Can I have $10?" He'd never have any money. Eventually we would ask him, why don't you have any money? And very wise man said, "Well, if I had money, I would spend it." So
That's a full amount of awareness, but I imagine that you've married a very powerful woman in her own right. That would be my guess.
yeah, absolutely. I will say this: we talked about having kind of a two-way conversation here, and I'm here for it. I will say that it took me years to realize that she didn't feel comfortable coming into that power financially when we first got married. And I didn't realize until years later when we talked about it, I kind of bigfooted her, so to speak. And it's only when she decided that that was not going to be the case anymore
What
that the things got level.
explain to me what you mean by Bigfoot.
She would she would acquiesce to my opinion.
I know
I
that.
I I I would more or less say, "Hey, I think we need to do things like this." I don't think I was demanding. She might have a different version of the story, but in my mind, the way I recall it, I would say, "Hey, I think we should do this, that, and the other." And even though she disagreed, there was a thing, a very traditional thing in my mind, in her mind, new to marriage.
Yeah.
It's like, well, he's the guy. I guess he's right.
I wrote a whole book about it.
Really.
Yeah. A lot of it was about how, even when I was younger, that I saw my mother paid the bills. I think what would be the most typical from my limited research is that the man is still the breadwinner, but that's changing. And that's oftentimes the female is the one that's paying the bills and doing the secretarial work around it. I mean, there's certainly some instances where women don't know one diddly thing about their husband's wealth, which is a very scary place to be in, I think, to not have some independence for both couples, especially now that there is, I think somebody told me yesterday she was a wealth management advisor. We're out and about again. And she's like 55, no, 55% of all stocks and bonds and everything are owned by women. So we're actually holding more, we're on the rise. And the question is, in my mind, because so my book is about love and money, and then it was about money and relationships. So I didn't do a very good job at this, but I want to introduce my three pillars, which I don't know, I'm going to be very curious to see if we can tie these into what we're talking about by people having successful relationships around money at home is,
Okay, but before you do that, I'm sorry. I have to ask this question because
please
this
do.
has been on my little sheet here for a minute, and you just kind of spelled it out there.
Hmm.
You differentiated between talking about love and money and talking about love and relationships.
Yes.
Going back to what you were saying earlier, I've read a fair amount about excuse me, money and relationships.
Well, I'd like to
I've
know what
read
those
far less
are.
about money, about love and money. I want you to go on with the point you were making earlier, but before, can you help me to
Clarify?
separate the two of those out?
Well, let me ask you, what do you how do you see those two being different?
Money and relationship is really probably more what we talk about in this podcast. So that's the very practical, how do we work together? How does our relationship support our money goals? So it's kind of a communication thing. And kind of going back to your example, if I'm the breadwinner and my wife is the person who pays the bills, there's another aspect to that. Who's doing the planning? And I think it's in a relationship, you're defining those roles. And once you're clear on those roles and you're clear on your objectives, then you have a plan. So the relationship thing is very tactical. It's not much different than you have to develop work
Business.
relationships in a
Yeah.
workplace, that
Yes.
kind of thing. Love and money, to me, maybe money can affect the emotional aspects of a
Yeah.
relationship. I don't know if you can fall in love for money. If you do, maybe that's not going to last. But I do think that money can cause friction within an emotional relationship to the extent that if there is anything called falling out of love, and I'm not going to get into that, it can fracture relationships.
Yeah.
So it's the way I think about it is it's the practical, which is the relationship thing, and then more of the emotional, which is the love thing. But I'd love to hear what you mean when you
Yeah.
say that.
Well, it's interesting that that came out of my mouth because I really feel like what you do in your marriage or in your relationships, you do with your children, you do in business, you do with the guy at the grocery store. So I think that it's all kind of combined, actually. I think that actually having what you're speaking about and money and relationships is much more of a business kind of deal, even if it's between you and your wife, who's gonna, and my sense, you talked about communication. To me, communication's number one in how you're gonna get there. And I think I in my things that I know about life is that I think the planning has to be by both people. Otherwise, the plan, though not one that's not planning, can feel like not good enough or not part of the conversation. And as I said, I just wrote the Substack about a friend who came to me and he was working 8 jobs, 8 jobs. And, his wife had grown up poor in a communist country. And so she came from some scarcity and wanted to make sure all the bills were paid. So he was doing all these things. But some of the jobs he was doing, like driving the school bus, he thought that she wanted him to drive the school bus so he would be part of the community and that he would be helping out with the children and blah, 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 blah. And once they sat down, I was like, you guys need to sit down, have a business meeting around this and talk about what jobs are working for you and what jobs aren't. Because she was also upset that he wasn't at home, right? So there was conflictual messages going on. And when they finally took the time, I said, make sure that the children aren't around, that you have ample time, that you're not drinking liquor, that you're, like being prepared to have a conversation about how you want to move forward in your life, even over the next 5 years or whatever that plan is going to be. So communication is critical, and they did that, and their marriage got back on track because it was suffering a little bit because she didn't feel like she had any say in what he was doing when he was open to allowing her to participate in the conversation. Then things shifted, and she was like, "Oh my God, I love you so much." Um, so I think that the two cross over. I think that the difference is love, yeah, pulls at heartstrings, and people feel unloved when they don't get enough presents. You could go back to the 5 love languages. Are you acts of service? Are you gift giving? Gift givers really like gifts. And if they're not getting them, they're probably not very happy. And knowing what your love language is really super important. And that doesn't mean you know what yours is. It means you know what your spouse's is, because they could be very, very different. I don't know if that's answering your question. It's interesting thing that I've never really thought about in that particular way. So,
Yeah, it does, and it brings up even more questions. I'm
ooh,
taking
please.
just volumes of notes here, and I'm trying to decide which direction I want to go in. You said something, and Actually, this just kind of came out of the back and forth of our conversation. I have never thought about it this way, but the wife, the female in the relationship, maybe gravitating more towards paying bills and more of the tactical things of running the household. What in the language of this podcast I actually called the COO at home, but that's
Yes,
a different thing.
for sure.
So those are two things that you can do kind of on an island. I've worked same company for over 30 years. If I leave this room right now and ask my wife, what is it that I do for a living? She can only give you the vaguest of vague ideas. She's just not interested in it. And that works. She doesn't have to know what I do. I go away, I come back in a mood, and there's money in the bank. That's all she needs to know. Same token, for so many years, particularly when we had young kids, she was running this joint
Hmm.
because I was at work so much, and I had no idea of how any of this worked. I mean, it is the cartoon way of looking at it, but yeah, I was the clueless, dad guy that didn't know how anything worked around the house. But all that works. Those things can work on an island. This planning thing that we're talking about, it was a great point you made. That's the one part of that. That's where this comes together. No matter who's the breadwinner, no matter who's paying the
Yeah,
bills, and those things can be done on an island. This planning thing is where it all has to come together, because if it's my plan or your plan, but it's not our plan, maybe we get where we're going, but we can't get there nearly as efficiently. And I think go as far as we can otherwise. And that's where I see the breakdown being so many times, is getting together with the planning. And I don't know, maybe it's because those two other roles almost have to work. Somebody has to pay the bills. Somebody's got to bring in the money. Those aren't
yeah,
those aren't
yeah, yeah. I
options.
hear what you're saying.
But what we're talking about with the planning, those things are options. And part of the thing that I love to explore in this podcast is how can we be better at that? How can we be better at coming together and doing that planning?
Yeah.
And someone like you, with the background you have, I'm sure you have a unique take on that. And I actually want to go a little further back to something that you said earlier
Yes.
that that caught my attention when you were talking about your childhood and how your father was very frugal and your mother would just pop up with jaguars in the in the driveway.
Not kidding. Wrote about it in my book.
I'm gonna assume that there was not a lot of planning or communication going
No.
on between the two of them. Am I correct?
Yeah, and the sad thing is that I finally figured out in writing this book, this years after, is that because my dad gave my mom an allowance, she had to beg for it. It was painful to watch. Sometimes he was like, "I don't have my checkbook," and he was gone half the time, and so she was dependent upon that money to pay for the household, and then I'm sure she went out and spent what she could, but she didn't have any money to buy a Jaguar. Well, what she did, which was really shitty, is my grandmother had died and left both my brother and I, each one of us, $250,000, which was a lot of money, and she just never gave it to us. That's the Jaguar. Oops.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Did the
Wow.
same thing when I got married. She didn't like the budget my dad gave. She had to have the white umbrellas. We got married up here on Lake Tahoe. She didn't want the red and green umbrellas. She needed white. The flowers had to be a better budget. And I'm thinking, where did she get all this money? Like, I got a set amount of money. Oh yeah, my grandfather died. I spent that too. I was like, it's really fair. But
Okay.
that's water under the bridge at this point. I think it's an interesting uh, point that you're bringing up, and I will go back to this Substack. So even if the audience, maybe you don't have, the specific problem of having 8 jobs, you have maybe some issues with your work and, savings and stuff like that. And I think that my aha moment on the course of the show is that everybody should sit down maybe every 6 months, carve out some time to sit down with your spouse and say, hey, what are we doing? Where are we? It never occurred to me to have that kind of conversation in my marriage. We kind of did, but, and I didn't have real problems with love and money in my marriage. It was a long time ago and we were young and we didn't have a ton. But as I,
So
yeah,
let me ask a
please.
question right there because I wanted to get to this. Did you the example that was set for you
Hmm.
growing up? We talked about that. To what
Yep.
extent did you take those habits into your marriage, and how has that been taken into your relationships? Is it one of those things where you unconsciously found yourself being your mother, or was it, well, she did this, I'm definitely not going to do that? I'm really interested. I'm really interested to see how all of that translated in your life.
Well, it's weirdly enough. So my father had this thing, and he'd slap his hand down on the table, and he's like, "Don't marry anybody under $5 million." I don't even think he had $5 million, but I took the 180, Vince, and I was like, "Oh, I thought he said don't date anybody that has over $50 in their bank account." Now that's doing a 180, okay? I am not my mother in the at the fact that I'm not a spendy kind of person. I would rather work hard and play hard and have fun doing sports that I love than go shopping. I like things like this appeared in my closet. My daughter bought it for me. I was like, "Oh, that's lovely." By the way, it's a bubblegum pink shirt for you guys that can't see it. So I got this in my book. I wrote about that I got the confusionness of all of them. I was like, my mom's acting one way, my dad's acting another. As a small child, I'm like, are we rich or are we poor? I don't even fucking know. We lived in a moderate home, and then once he took the company public in 77, things began to change. But in my family, my dad was very controlling, and my mom was a chameleon. Yes, whatever you want, all the time. You could say, how do I look in this black dress? And she'd go, oh, just to die for, divine. Well, how do I look in the white dress? She's like, oh, to die for, divine. You didn't get an answer like black or white, mom. So I inherited, that's why I asked you the question about your mother, because in my work, I talk to a lot of people about the strength of their mothers, especially men, but for women too. Strong mothers tend to produce children that are relatively self confident, and they make wise choices in who they pick to marry. What are you laughing at?
Oh, nothing. When you said wise mother, I like to reflect on my mother sometimes,
Yes.
and
Well,
that
it
immediately took me
showed. I
back.
was like, that was very sweet, actually. Um, I didn't get that gift. I was reflecting while we were talking a few minutes ago about this, is that do my children consider me to be a wise matriarchal mother? I went through so much with inheriting this and the immense amount of shame and guilt I found around. Now I'm like, wow, I worked my ass off and I made a ton of money and I'm really doing amazing things. So I'm going to be fine. I'm old, but I'm doing all this for my kids, to make sure that they inherit money and they've got an opportunity to do well in this tough times for millennials. But I was thinking, yeah, about whether my children thought I was a strong mother. And I'll tell you what, for all the ladies out there, I am a different person than I was when I was writing that book because of the three things that I was going to mention before: personal responsibility, and that means for your finances, for your life, for your self care, everything. Saying no if it's not a hell yeah. Like, and as you step up the chain of money, there's more and more opportunities to say no. And a lot of us don't like to say no. I don't like to say no. I'm a people pleaser. I don't want people not to like me. I don't want them to, think that I'm, spoiled and rich and keeping it all for myself. So I give. I don't do that anymore. And the last thing that changed my life was learning how not to take things personally. And I still get stuck in it. We just had family 4th of July. It has its moments. But I think that my children, that I've changed so much over the last really 3 years. It's been going on since the pandemic, since I broke up with the last boyfriend. I've changed so much in 3 years of not taking things personally and really taking responsibility for my part in my life, that my children they see the change. They say, "Oh my God, you're so much more calm than you used to be. You're so much more together." So I would think that they would look at me as being a mother that is empowered, which I'm very grateful for, and that just comes from me doing my work.
Yeah, and from listening to you talk about that, you were married at one point. Sounds like maybe you were relatively young when that happened. It seems like if we go back to your relationship with money, for lack of a better way of putting it seems like that has evolved,
Oh, yeah.
but not particularly within your marriage. It sounds like there was a lot of evolution that maybe took place after that, because
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier that when you were married, didn't have a lot of money, maybe it was not a big deal. It all kind of worked itself out. But it sounds like you did the work on yourself more as a single mother.
Yeah. I mean, I got divorced when I was 39, and my ex-husband worked for Goldman Sachs. Like we moved to New York, we met in California. So it wasn't like we were poor, but it was just things were just different back then. That was in the 1990s. There wasn't a lot of extravagance in, our day-to-day world that we came across. Of course, there was rich people wandering around, but it's not the same as what's happening today, 35 years later. So I grew up in a relatively affluent community. It was simple. As I said, we played kickball, but, I didn't have a lot of problems with money in the marriage. Like, he made it, I did the bills. Most of my growth came from this outer journey of trying to figure out how to be wealthy, because all of a sudden, my friends in Aspen, I like to hang around the really cute, the ski bums, the people, they didn't have any money. And I was like one of them. And then once I inherited it, I wasn't like one of them anymore. They were like, that's going to be $59 for your glass of Chardonnay or something. I was like, oh my God. So I was living in this dichotomy between not knowing whether I was rich or I was poor. That same message that I had when I was a kid, am I rich or am I poor? I didn't really know how to live into this. And I can happily say, and really I've been trying to promote my book and sell 100,000 copies. And that's just my measure of how many people I can help get my message to, that they're not alone, that there are pillars that can, many of your audience has probably read or listened to Let Them by Mel Robbins. These three things: personal responsibility, saying no when necessary and when it doesn't spark joy, and not taking things personally, are three ways to let them do their thing, and I've learned so much about, as I become an entrepreneur, I'm really good at making money. And I'm really proud of that now. And I used to have to be afraid to say that. I didn't want anyone to know. So,
So
yes.
today, if you ask yourself that question, am I rich? Am I poor? I'm going to assume we're going to take poor off of the list. Okay.
We're gonna take more.
I think we can take that one off. Do you necessarily think of yourself as rich? Do you think of yourself as wealthy? How do you answer that question to yourself today?
Well, let me tell you, I am up for having a TED Talk. So I'm going to answer that with my TED Talk, which I haven't selected a stage, or they haven't selected me. We haven't found the right place, but is about, no matter how high your net worth goes, you will always default back to the level of your self worth. So it's really important. So I didn't really finish my point. My outer journey was trying to learn to be a wealthy woman. And what that turned into was an extremely inner journey about how to be happy and how to love myself, to practice self care, to be a good, loving person, to not send confusing messages. Because sometimes I would try to help people out and give them money. Oh, no, no expectations in return. Really? Well, there were. There were with the boyfriends. The expectations that they were going to stick around, that they were going to be really nice to me, that, that didn't always happen. So I have such a different philosophy. It seemed to me I give a lot away. I do a lot of philanthropy. I was out, I think I shared with you, on a water ski boat teaching a bunch of adapted people how to go wake surfing, which was really fun. I do a lot of philanthropy in Africa. The more money and the more things that I give away, the more that it comes back. It's just mind blowing. People say if you're generous, it comes back. Yeah, I'm living proof that it is. So I've learned a lot. And seriously, every day gets better. I thought I'd, like when I finished my book, I was like, okay, it's not like I get to the end of my journey, but the journey's always here. There's always people that will push your buttons and they never stop. It's just, I spend a lot less time getting upset over him. I'm like, maybe Vince is having a bad day or what, whatever it is, we don't know. And boy, if you want to see some amazingness and never feel sorry for yourself again, go out wake surfing with a bunch of people that don't have the use of their legs. They're quadriplegics. They're getting in this water. I'm like, he's gonna drown. Like, he didn't drown. So inspiring. So I think the lesson for me and what I try to teach in this book is I don't care how much money you have. I don't care what a great singer you are or are you a great human being that's happy? I didn't really get to pick what was going to happen, whether I was going to be rich or poor or born in Ross, California or the middle of Uganda. Nobody gave me, maybe on an unconscious choice, I had to talk with somebody up there, wherever there is. But on a conscious choice, I just arrived. And now what do I do? Right?
Yeah, and you've mentioned the book a few times. The book is A Woman on Top: My Journey Through Self-Discovery Through Love and Money. Based on that title and based on what you shared with us, I think it's obvious the benefits that this book has for women. It seems like you've taken your personal journey of self-discovery and making peace with yourself and money and dividing out all those questions you had in your mind growing up. Am I rich? Am I poor? Am I this? You've kind of gone beyond defining yourself by money and defining yourself by other things. And a fully realized person is great. Sometimes I think when couples get together and maybe they're not fully realized, that manifests itself in a lot of the things we're talking about here in terms of not only being able to connect on money, but not being able to connect on a lot of things. So I certainly see how this book could help women really discover themselves. So even maybe if they're not married or with somebody at the time, when those life circumstances occur, it puts them in a position to be more prepared
Yes.
to have a fully realized relationship. They're secure in themselves. They know, hey, we need to deal with this money thing, but it's not the most important thing. It makes them better. One thing that you
Hey.
shared with me that surprised me a bit, though, is how many men
Hi,
read your
yeah.
book, how popular the book is with men. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I get everyone I know to buy a book. I'll try to talk you into buying a book. $18.96 on Amazon. Here's a picture of it for you.
I'm
Or
on it.
buy the hard copy would be really nice because the more people that I get to buy it and spend the $18.96, the higher up it goes to the Amazon list, which pushes it out. I'll answer your question in a minute, but we asked AI, like, how many women with certain parameters, that are struggling over taking things too personally and not saying no, which is very true for sometimes the one that's, taking care of the house. They say yes to everything and they have no life. But we Googled it and it said 83.6 million women could benefit from reading my book. 83.6 million. So whereas I was like, 100,000 copies, how am I going to do that? That's a drop, a little in the bucket. So sometimes this book will sit on people's shelves, and it is coming out in Audible. So if you do buy a book now, you'll get the Audible version. I tell everyone, just read the prologue in chapter one. And if you don't end up reading the whole book, I'll eat my hat, but I'll also give you an Audible. Anyway, so it sits on people's desks and then they'll write me notes. I get text messages. Oh my God, I finally opened up your book. Wow, this is amazing. And I do also do the other platform you can find me on is Substack under my name, Suzanne Leydecker, spelled Leydecker. And I've been writing these really juicy little tidbits. Some of them are about business, some of them are about love. It's all about what you do. Your CFO at home, really. A lot of it is about that. And men are the ones that comment on it more. The only thing I shared with you, Vince, before, the only thing that I can think of is that men are very interested in how women operate because at this point in society, as far as I can tell, they're very confused, most of them. So they don't know, as I gave you the example of whether to open the car door or not. You could get in trouble if you do or in trouble if you don't. I guess the nice thing to do would be, and the thing that we need to learn to do for each other is say, hey, how do you feel about car doors? Or whatever, so that there's some communication around it, because we're so mean. We yell at you when you do, and we yell at you when you don't. I mean, they're just so confused. So I think that the reason why it's men, and certainly a lot of women reach out to me too, but is because they want to understand.
Yeah, and going back to what we were talking about earlier, communication,
Yes,
again, a woman discovering herself and her priorities and what's important to her is very important, needless to say. But I gotta say, on behalf of myself and also men that I talk to every day, yeah, we don't really understand. So I could, we don't
you
understand
mean
you women.
women in
Yeah,
general?
yeah, with all due
They're
respect. So
confused.
I can certainly see that because that frustration manifests itself in a lot of different ways other than money. But if you want to
Yes.
keep the conversation towards money, again, that ability for me to understand where you're coming from, it's hard for us to build that mutual plan if I don't understand. I not only need to understand what you want practically out of life, but I have to kind of understand the whys, what drives you, what your desires are, the whole nine yards. Because just for me to articulate things to you in a way that makes sense, you mentioned earlier one thing you're taking away from this conversation is the need to have those conversations.
Yes.
I have had so many conversations with so many, not couples, but men, women who talk to me about money because they know that's what I talk about, that the very subject brings up so much anxiety that they really can't have the conversation. So
Yes.
anything that can be done to kind of break that down is useful. And naturally, I think naturally by reading your book, I think on both sides, that could be something that's helpful. Are there any practical tips that you can give our listeners? Just maybe one or two based on things that are in your book, based on your life experience, based on what you observed out of your parents, just all of your experience as far as if that anxiety has been built up in that relationship because of money conversations gone wrong. Any tips for maybe reestablishing that communication?
Well, I would have to go back to these three pillars. That's what really, I mean, I wrote about each one of them along the way, but I didn't know that that was what I was doing. And so I published a book in 23. I started in 20. I broke up with the third boyfriend. Same demographics, super hot, really young, professional, semi-professional athletes in sports don't make any money, broker than crap. I made the same mistake 3 times in a row, expecting it to have different results.
You
Now,
have a type.
I have a type. Weirdly enough, I mean, I've kind of changed my ways, and I'm not dating anybody currently, but I'm really okay with that. I got a new grandson. I'm married to a book called A Woman on Top. But strangely enough, like I would wonder how I would handle that now. Because before I had issues with money. Remember I told you when the boy slammed his way out my door, he's like, "You can't do that. You don't know anything about it." Well, he was right. I didn't. And what I now know is that because I'm working on my self-worth, I swear to God, Vince, you work on your self-worth and your net worth will go up. Now, I can't promise you it's going to be $100 million, but it's going to be something because we will always go to the level of our self worth. So the higher my self worth goes, the more I'm rocking it. So I'm living proof to myself. I have to pinch myself and go, okay. And it's not like, the reason why people want to win the lottery is because we think collectively that money is going to solve all problems. It's just not. You're going to have the same number of problems, might be kind of different. You could pay your bills or whatever, but you're going to have a whole new set of problems that you didn't have before. So that's why my whole thing is it doesn't really matter rich or poor. It matters, who you are on the inside. Um, so I think that, yes, those are the three things that changed my life and allowed me to be more successful, more happy. I was not happy, Vince. I wasn't happy for the first 13 more years that I had this money. I thought it was a curse. I didn't want it. I thought about giving it away, and all they were going to say is the rich girl was such a dumb blonde. She gave the money away, and then I was going to be poor. And then I was like, that's probably not the best idea. I I have to handle and learn how to handle, and I have a lot of people that are haters. Well, you're the rich girl. You didn't. Oh my God, somebody's knocking on my door. Amazon. Everyone needs some Amazon packages. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, so those are my tips. Is if you practice those, and the more you practice them, the easier they become. They become almost second nature. And I just, as I said, it was Fourth of July, and you got a little, I've never had a Fourth of July or any family vacation where I haven't cried at some point. Took something personal. What the kids say, they're in their 30s, like to tee hee hee at mommy, laugh at her behavior, and sometimes mommy doesn't think that's very funny. I'm like, I'm doing everything for you guys. And I said, I will not cry. I will drop some stories that I know that they roll their eyes at. We've heard this 100 times. It doesn't bring me any joy to hear that. It doesn't bring them to hear the same story. So I just said, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to let things go. And it was better, and I had a great time.
So that self-examination through the lens of what you talk about in the book and through the lens of the three keys that you've talked about is
Those are my
critical.
tips.
Yeah,
Yeah. They will change your life.
exactly. Yeah, and even though your book, the primary target audience for your book is women, men can not only read this book maybe to get a little bit more insight into the way women think, but I would imagine that those three keys
Are good for everyone.
work with men.
Yes, they
Exactly.
do. Especially
Exactly.
some reason, the most feedback I've got from men is that when I say no if it's not a hell yeah, oh, they're like, oh, I got a problem with that. Oh, I don't. You're taking care of your parents, or you're providing too much for your kids, and you can't let them go because like there's so many different things where, it's
Yeah.
hard to say no. So,
I can definitely see the possibilities because if two people bring those people, those more self-examined,
yes, I like.
here's what's really important to me, versions of themselves to the table to discuss anything, money or anything else,
What do you think's
coming to
going to happen?
mutual agreement, it's going to be so much easier. I get it. I get it.
So much easier. That's the whole point. And as I said, I wrote my book specifically about breadwinning females. But what it's turned into is that, yes, if you become more, I love the self examination. If you do that, you're going to be one happier. I mean, there's a great book written by Arthur Brooks, and Oprah Winfrey kind of chimes in, called The Key to Happiness. I think that The Pursuit of Happiness. And in this book, it's like they can measure happiness. I used to think, what are we all doing here? What is this all about? I thought it was to be peaceful. Yeah, sometimes things are peaceful and sometimes just not. But can you be happy through them? Can you just
Right.
see the good in it and let go? Let go. All the stuff doesn't matter. And it's going to keep coming, but you're going to get better at just deflecting it. And you're going to have a better way of working through your things when you're talking about the CFO of the household.
Right.
And also, one more thing that I wanted to respond to before is that I think it's really important. Like, I don't think you can operate as an island. I think it's really important that you understand and respect what your wife is doing, and that she understands and respects what you're doing. Now, she doesn't, now I'm curious, I think you help people to negotiate through these kind of issues in life. Is that your job?
I didn't think about it that way, but in essence, yes.
You're a shrink.
When when I
I
started
get it.
this podcast, I told myself that it was going to be all about practical tips. So we were going to talk about budgeting and we were going to talk about methods of getting out of debt, and all of that is important.
Yes.
But more and more and more, I find myself gravitating more towards conversations like this
Yes.
because you can educate people and help them be financially literate until the birds come home. But if you can't execute it, if there are these emotional barriers that are keeping you from executing it, then it's just good academic knowledge. So I've become so fascinated with conversations like this, and I'm always looking for a different way to approach it because there's a little different angle that helps everybody. This is so complicated that I really want to thank you for bringing a different perspective to this conversation.
Thank you. And I think what you'll find is if you continue to follow that intuitive sense that says, hey, this is more important, that you can then weave into the conversation people's desires to learn how to do their budget and people's desires to learn how to work together to do these things. We've just been approaching it in such a way that we were educated in, or not so much. Sometimes budget would be a really good thing to teach in school, but also would be how to be happiness, how to be a loving being, how to practice good, positive self worth by taking care of yourself, and that those things make people more inspired to do their best.
Yeah, and it's something that goes beyond financial literacy. I read so much about that, and again, that's so important. My homework from this conversation is to come up with a phrase that captures what you and I are talking about because it's beyond financial literacy. It's financial something or other, and I'm going to think about it and
Well, let me
trademark
know,
it
and
or whatever it is you do.
yeah, let me know because and I'll put up we'll think about it too.
Absolutely. So, Suzanne, really appreciate the conversation. We have talked numerous times about the book, A Woman on Top, My Journey Through Self-Discovery Through Love and Money. We will put a direct link to the book in the show notes, along with a link to your website, SuzanneLeydecker.com. And we also have social media links for you
Thank
based
you.
on our conversation earlier. Even though we have your LinkedIn and Facebook, it seems like Instagram is where you're most active.
Yeah,
So
and
we will
these
have,
new Substacks, which are very short, they're less than 1,000 words, so they take 7 minutes to read. But people are loving them. So fun to write because I'm like, what did I really feel about that? Oh yeah, I felt
okay.
shitty.
Yeah, I love that. We'll add that as well. And again, I
You
really
should
want
go
to
read
thank,
the one that is. You should read the one that's going to post on Friday. It'll be really good for you in your business.
I
And
will.
no, so
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like a link to the show notes kind of
it
situation,
is.
but I will definitely keep an eye out for that. So really enjoyed the conversation. Like I said, we are more than 200 episodes into this podcast. There are only so many topics. I'll admit there are only so many topics that you could talk about on this subject. And anytime you can find a fresh approach, a fresh perspective that might resonate with people in a way that the same subject has not resonated before, that is always welcome. I'm definitely going to add A Woman on Top to my reading list. We're going to the beach in a few weeks. I'll
Oh,
have a
please
copy.
do.
Now, the first thing I'll have to do is explain to my wife exactly what I'm
Oh, I
reading.
am.
If she sees me reading a book called A Woman on Top, we
It's
got to
so
clear that one up. We got to clear that
yeah.
one up
I did have
right
a
out of the
couple,
gate.
and she read the book first, and she's like, dude, you need to read this book, husband. Please read this book. And he's like, I'm not reading a book called A Woman on Top. Right? He's like, I don't even know that. Like, that's a crazy title. Like, I'm not going to read it. Oh, he picked it up right before they went on vacation, and he read the first 80 pages without stopping.
Oh
He
wow!
just sat on his deck, and he's like, oh my God, she wasn't kidding, was she?
Right.
I was like, well, so you can explain to your wife. And then I think actually for men who are listening, It's better for you to read it first, and even if you're like, "Oh, my wife could really use that," yeah, that's probably not gonna work. If you're like, "Honey, you should read this book." I All men will get something out of it, and the one thing that they get a lot of times out of it is if you've made money, how you're gonna gift to your children, especially if they're daughters. How are you gonna
Wow.
prepare them, not just financially, emotionally, to be able to handle it?
Wow. It's a great way, I'm sure, to open up conversations for men because, yeah, a wife sees you reading a book called A Woman on Top. She's going to go, what are you reading there again? And then
And
you
she
open
wants to
up
read it.
opportunity for a lot of great conversation.
Oh,
Suzanne,
yeah.
thank you
Go
so
for it.
much for being so generous with your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on CFO at Home.
Yeah, it was really fun. I loved it.